Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. My name is Yusol, and I am the product marketing manager working on Plaid Income. Today, I'm joined here with Tommy, who is one of our engineering leads on Plaid's credit team. So before we jump into this session today, I wanted to set the stage and talk about what it's like to actually verify income in today's landscape. I'm sure a lot of you have seen this happen firsthand or experienced it yourselves, but the way people earn income today has changed dramatically, especially since the COVID pandemic. Gig work, freelancing, multiple income streams, a lot of that is now the norm rather than the exception. And in the US, over 1 in 3 workers actually have reported that they are engaging in independent work, often alongside their traditional 9 to 5s. So, what does that mean? It means that there's a lot of people out there who have stable income, but they're not easily able to prove it when applying for things like a loan or for an apartment because they simply don't receive a standard W-2 form before tax season. And the legacy systems that verify income today simply haven't kept up to capture the different types of income that people make today. So that's why me and Tommy are super excited to talk to everyone here and walk through what's new with Plaid Income, our income verification solution from our consumer reporting agency. We will talk about what's new, and then we'll actually talk about, or we'll run through some examples of how Plaid Income works in practice. And then finally, we'll leave some time at the end for some live Q&A. And everything that we talk about today will be recorded and shared out. So let's get started. Tommy, you've been deep in this for a while now, and I'm sure you're really eager to share. Tell us what's new with Plaid Income.
Thanks, Cecil. Yeah, I am. And I am because for the last 6 months, the team has been busy rebuilding the engine behind Plaid income, kind of to better reflect how people actually earn that income today. There's a new categorization model that supports kind of a new standardized income taxonomy that exposes us to a whole broader coverage while also giving customers new features. Such as having more control over what qualifies as income.
Wow, that is a lot of big changes. Why don't we double click on the categorization model for a second? Can you tell us a bit more about how it works?
Yeah, sure. So this new kind of income categorizing process is powered by a transformer-based LLM trained on a very large-scale transaction data set from within the Plaid network. Because Plaid sits at the center of the largest open banking network, we see millions of real financial data points every day, which gives us a really strong foundation to kind of see and learn how income actually shows up in the wild. Yeah.
That, that makes a lot of sense. And it's super cool how the model has basically seen how income shows up across millions of people in the US. But let's pause there for a second. How does this all translate when you're looking at one borrower's transaction history?
Yeah, so like practically speaking, it's no longer just kind of looking at the transaction label and trying to do basic pattern matching. Instead, it looks at the context behind a deposit, how income flows over time, how frequently it appears, maybe how amounts shift, and tries to kind of figure out what patterns, what that reveals kind of about the underlying source of income. It also accounts for irregular payments, so kind of like that one-time or atypical deposit doesn't distort the overall picture. Yeah.
Wow, so that's a lot of information that the model is capturing, ingesting, processing. How does Plaid keep everything organized?
Good question. That's really why we backed up and invested in this new income taxonomy. With this update, we're introducing an expanded taxonomy that classifies income both at like a really broad level, but also a really granular subcategory level. So, for example, earned income is a broad category, but underneath that, it now includes salary, gig income, self-employed income. And that makes it much easier to understand not only just like how much money is moving into an account, but what kind of income it represents, especially for income types like self-employed that have been, a lot harder to pick up on historically.
Yeah, I was actually taking a look at all the different categories earlier today, and I'm definitely impressed by the level of granularity that Plaid Income is now able to capture. For example, for retirement alone, we're now able to differentiate across government-derived benefits like Social Security checks, private retirement like insurer-sponsored retirement income, and then also plan distributions like 401k distributions.
Yeah, exactly. So we had to evolve our classifications to get more granular and have a broader kind of taxonomy because Plaid sees and evaluates so many more types of income relative to a lot of legacy providers. Those legacy providers typically cover about half to maybe 60% of US earners because, the applicant basically has to be their employer has to be in an employer reported payroll network to be verified. Plaid, by contrast, can verify any income for anyone that links a bank account that captures their income activity, and it gives us a much broader, visibility into like traditional and non-traditional income. So for those users who connected a bank account and show an active income stream, Plaid can return a gross income estimate about 80% of the time. And now, to be clear, this isn't really a perfect one-to-one comparison with a legacy payroll provider. Those systems can be very precise for the payroll records that they do have, but if they can't find a match, there's no result at all. Yeah.
Got it. That makes sense. And I mean, it especially makes sense given most adults in the US at least have a bank account. So I'm sure visibility across different income types is definitely top of mind for our audience. And I'm really glad that we covered both the breadth and depth of Plaid's income model. So I'm sure kind of like the next question the audience is wondering about now is how does our model actually perform? What determines good performance? Good performance.
Yeah. So in terms of performance, the way we actually evaluate accuracy in the model is through precision and recall. These are big words, but very understandable. Precision tells us how often the category we said it is truly what it is. So if we say it's salary, how often it is actually salary. Recall tells us, how successfully we identified posits that the incoming transactions that belong to that category. So, for example, how much of all salary, how many of those do we pick up on? So in lending, precision really matters a lot because low precision effectively can mean you're saying something is income when it's not. And that can end up like overcounting earnings. And that's where we've seen really meaningful improvements here. Overall, our income classification improved by 48% to the previous model. And part of the reason why we're, like now 3 times better at detecting outliers, like those are regular payments. Now, this improvement isn't a reflection kind of the previous model shortcoming. Instead, the way consumers receive income is rapidly evolving, and staying on top of those trends just simply require kind of like a continuous retraining mindset and, updating regularly to capture those emerging trends. So, for example, one thing our models have historically been strong at is capturing salary, but now it's also stronger at capturing, self-employed and gig income. Overall, our earned income category, which, some may consider to be one of the most important categories for lending, I think for obvious reasons, we're seeing, 86% precision without sacrificing recall. There's a few other kind of important updates we'll kind of show more in the demos later, including more control over, giving customers more control over what qualifies as income and what will roll into the income estimates, and a new embedded refresh capability that keeps income, data current over time. Taken all together, these updates like really mark the biggest evolution in Plaid income since its inception, delivering like a significantly more accurate and complete view of income based on bank accounts. So I'm really excited today to kind of like get this out into the wild.
Well, thanks so much, Tommy, for covering what's new with Plaid Income. With that, let's run through some user scenarios so we can see how Plaid Income and these new updates work in the real world. So this is the first example that we're talking about here. In this scenario, we have a borrower, her name is Lucy, and she is applying for a loan. So if you'll take a look on the right-hand side, that shows her bank activity. And over the past 6 months, there's a few things that are happening in her account. One, she receives biweekly payments or direct deposits from a company called Apex LLC, and the transaction label and amounts are typically the same every 2 weeks. On the other hand, she also receives monthly transfers from an entity called Lucy Design Co. The transaction labels for each payment are a little bit different and varied, and also the payment amounts kind of vary month to month. So, given like all of these different transaction items here, how would Plaid Income categorize these deposits?
Yeah, let's start with the easier case. The Ape, like those deposits coming from Apex are like pretty classically straightforward, right? The model sees a very consistent pattern here. Inflows from the same company, on a regular bi-weekly cadence is very, very similar amounts, nearly equivalent. And so we can pretty confidently group these together into a single income stream, and we classify that as like earned income salary. Now, those payments from Lucy Design Co. are where things get kind of a lot more interesting. The first thing we'll do is kind of like look past the exact wording of each transaction to see if these payments actually try to come from the same like entity or place. Even though these labels vary, sometimes if we look here, it says like transfer, sometimes like abbreviate, like the transfer word is abbreviated. Sometimes there's very little metadata beyond that. They all pretty clearly to a human point back to the same entity. It's like Lucy Design. So the model uses that similarity to kind of group them together into a single income stream. Now, to just be really clear, this isn't actually like basic pattern matching going on. What's happening behind the scenes here is kind of a clustering algorithm that uses not only just like pure textual similarity, but textual similarity that gives like more weights to key or unique words or nouns versus these like filler words. And so that's what allows us to like have this variance in transaction description, but still recognize, oh, they're coming from the same kind of entity. And so from there, we've grouped them together, and now we're going to try to see how that stream behaves over time. In this case, the deposits are recurring and tied to the same source, and they follow a pretty consistent monthly pattern, even if the amounts may vary, which seems, for this income type, like, is pretty classic. So that combination tells us that this, isn't random money movement around or transfers between different accounts. It's likely Lucy is paying herself from her business account. So instead of treating these purely as transfers, we will recognize them as coming from a business, and classify them as, earned income self-employed.
It's actually so cool how Plaid Income is able to basically look at these like almost random looking transfer deposits and say like this is Lucy paying herself. I guess that really is what we mean by understanding context. So I guess like let's take it one step further. We know that Lucy has a salary. We know that she also makes self-employed income. But let's say she wants to make some extra cash. And so she started driving for a rideshare platform called GoRide, and she just received her first paycheck. So she's never worked at GoRide before, and this is the first time a transaction from GoRide has hit her bank account. How would the model look at this information and what would it tell us?
Yeah, no, I love it. Lucy's grinding. So great question. And so this is really where frequency and outlier detection come into play. When we see a deposit like this for the first time, even though it may seem like a paycheck from an entity called GoRide, which will, posit here as a gig platform, a known gig platform, the model doesn't immediately assume that it's income. Right now, it's just a single data point. It could be just a refund from their ride on GoRide. So we treat it as an outlier until we have enough evidence that it's actually recurring.
Cool. And I guess then, like, at what point will the model treat this as an actual income stream versus an outlier?
Yeah, so typically once we've seen that deposit come in at least twice, we can confidently recognize it as kind of recurring income, rather than a one-off payment. So once we see that second paycheck come in from GoRide, we'll start, flipping that like is active to true for this income.
Got it. So I'm going to assume that if I'm a lender, I would definitely want to know if Lucy's income streams have increased from two sources to three different sources. But like at this point in time, we only have this one data point. So let's say like I want to check in a few weeks or maybe a month to see if Lucy has continued to work at GoRide and is continuing to receive paychecks from them. How does that work? Do I have to kind of like ask Lucy to reapply for the loan? Do I have to pull a another report? I'm curious.
Yeah, no, not at all. It's really slick. We've added a new feature called embedded refresh that helps you keep Lucy's income up to date, or your view of her income. So Lucy only needs to connect her bank account one time, grant permission for us to access her financial data once, and no kind of like human in the loop needs to occur again.
Cool. Okay, awesome. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and move to our next user scenario. So for this example, our borrower here, his name is Danny, and he is a salesperson with a typical sales compensation structure that includes regular biweekly paychecks from a company called Big Tech Inc., as well as a percent commission off of the sales deals that he closes. Because sales are typically seasonal, there are some months where he does really great and he gets these huge commission payments, and then other months he doesn't really get anything at all. So let's say in this past month, he received a very large commission payment, and it is a lot bigger relative to his biweekly paychecks. Will that immediately affect his monthly income? And how does the model treat something like this when you kind of zoom out?
Yeah. Well, first, good job, Danny. Keep those deals coming. But the model, what will happen here is that the model will first anchor on Danny's base income, those kind of regular bi-weekly paychecks from big tech, and treats it as his core stable earning recurring income when calculating and projecting his future income. And when we see kind of a large commission payment come through, while we recognize it's from the same underlying source, we're not going to treat it just like any other paycheck. Instead, what we do is, we evaluate it relative to the rest of that same income stream. And if the commission payment is, significantly larger than his typical paycheck, or it only shows up maybe occasionally, we'll flag it as kind of an outlier, as a one-time thing. So lenders, know that this could distort kind of the overall picture, and they may want to drill in. We still surface it under the, earned income umbrella, and we'll put it in as part of this same stream, but we'll flag it as an outlier, and we won't automatically roll it into kind of a core income calculation.
That's awesome that our model is able to make that distinction because I'm assuming that as a lender, if I'm looking at Danny from like a monthly view versus a quarterly view versus a yearly view, these commissions can really change how we evaluate applicants. So I'm curious though, let's say Danny, he got into a huge fight with his boss at work and he basically quit his job and hadn't received paychecks from big tech for a few months now. I guess how would the model treat the situation then that Danny is going through?
Yeah. So in this case, kind of we look at whether that income is showing up in like recent activity. So if Danny hasn't been paid by big tech recently, that stream recent like will naturally kind of fall out of his, current income and becomes flagged as inactive. And if there's no other source to, replace that income, his overall income estimates will be adjusted accordingly. So it's important to remember using embedded refresh, you're able to get that kind of updated view, that update in what the new income numbers are without needing Danny to take action on that.
Cool. Okay, last question. Let's say after Danny quit his job, he decided to pursue his dream of becoming a full-time day trader. So now he's regularly cashing out funds from a mobile day trading app called Day Trade LLC, and it is going into his bank account as deposits. So let's say if I'm a lender, now that Danny's income or the way Danny earns money has shifted, will Plaid Income be able to let me know that that is true? Like, how does Plaid Income deal with this kind of change?
Yeah, like this kind of comes back to some of those like emerging trends we were talking about, right? This is exactly the type of kind of case where there isn't a single right answer for, the entire industry. By default, what we're going to do is we're going to categorize these deposits as kind of like a brokerage related income. We'll label it as like, transfer from brokerage, and not earned income. But whether or not, this is applicable to, be counted as active income that we can be relied on and applies to maybe a lender's, firm under like their underwriting policy, is really bespoke to kind of each individual firm or use case. So others may exclude it, because it's, not tied to kind of a traditional, more traditional earned income, but others may choose to include it because it's predictable enough or recurring historically. So that's why we introduced configurable rules. Lenders kind of now have the flexibility to be able to define what counts as income and what should roll up into those income estimates. What they do is they, choose to include or exclude, certain, categories from that math. So in this case, you could include or exclude brokerage related activity, depending on your underwriting policy. And that kind of configurability is available for every category type in our taxonomy. So it's like totally
Wow.
customizable. Yeah.
I guess then like if I wanted to set these types of filters to exclude certain categories, let's say like gambling, for example, um, is it kind of technical? Like, do I need developer experience in order to execute that change, or how does that work?
Yeah, so it's just a really, really simple, like literally one line change to your request body. You pass in a set of categories that are included, excluded, and updating that is an absolutely trivial change. Yeah.
Cool.
Yep.
Super easy.
Cool.
So thank you so much, Tommy. We are actually running close on time now. And first, before I open the floor to Q&A, I wanted to say we hope this session really gave you a clear picture of how the latest version of Plaid Income captures how people earn income today. We covered our new categorization model, as well as our standardized taxonomy that supports both a broad and granular level of coverage across different income types, as well as embedded refresh that keeps income current and configurable policies that allow lenders and other customers to control what actually qualifies as acceptable income. So with that, I am going to open the floor up for Q&A. Let me just see the chat here. Okay, first question, Tommy. You mentioned earlier in the example, in one of the examples that Plaid Income is able to pick up on whether an income stream is active or not. But how quickly does the model pick up on that status? Is that after, like right after they stop earning for that income source, or
Yeah.
does it take a week?
Gotcha. Okay, so this is really dependent on the context of the stream. So if someone is paid, let's say monthly, a month has to pass before we expect that next payment to occur. And oh, we see it's not occurring. Now it's inactive. If that, cadence that we've established by looking at the context of the stream is much faster, like weekly, then we only need to wait, 7 or 8, maybe 9 days before we're like pretty confident that, that actually has rolled over and is now inactive. So the short answer is, like we will pick up on it as soon as the expected next payment is not met.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, let me just check to see. Okay. One more question. Outside of lending, are there any other use cases that Plaid Income supports today?
Mhm. Oh, totally. Actually, one of our biggest use cases for Plaid Income today is active customers are in kind of the prop tech. So this could be property managers or tools for them, to essentially verify, incoming consumers, like income profiles, that, it's been kind of a rising trend. I don't know if you've followed this, but like income verification, like fraud from documents. So you apply for kind of an apartment, and then you're like, here's a W-2, but the W-2 is like generated by AI at this point. It's so easy to that lenders are not lenders, property managers are like really looking to like get a truly more verified view of applicants' income. And that's one of our major use cases today.
Got it. Yeah, I mean, that makes a ton of sense, especially with that rise in AI and fraudulent documents.
Yeah.
I mean, you can't really beat bank source data that comes straight from someone's account. Anyways, I'm so sorry. We are out of time. Thank you all for joining us again, and definitely reach out if you have additional questions. Bye, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.